your life soulmates. And that's what we have. And that's what I believe God intends every marriage in the Lord to be. As we look at this passage, there are directives that are given to the husbands, and there are directives that are given to the wives. But the whole spirit of it is to look not only to your own interests, but to the interests of others. The whole spirit of what is commanded is to meet the most basic needs of that particular spouse. The needs of our wives to be loved. The needs of our husbands to be respected.
Come on.
And God, in a mysterious way, calls each partner of that marriage to submit themselves to the other to meet that basic fundamental need.
Come on.
Amen. And so the husbands are called, like Jesus, to be the leaders. To see this, the marriage is a partnership, but the husband is to assume the role of spiritual leadership in the marriage. So to speak, to be the senior partner. But he's to be a whole lot more than that. A whole lot more. He's to be the lover. To have an unselfish love, to meet his wife's needs.
Come on.
To spend time with her, to sacrifice his time, to sacrifice his energy, to be sensitive to his wife's physical needs, to be sensitive to his wife's emotional needs, to be sensitive to his wife's spiritual needs, to have an exclusive love for her and no one else.
Come on.
To have a love that initiates. He is the initiator of that love. Because God first loved us. The husband is the first love his wife. To show that love in words and in deeds. To be considerate of his wife. To be forgiving of his wife. Wives are to respect their husbands. Why? Because as the wife's basic need is love, the husband's basic need is respect. Not that wives don't need respect or husbands don't need love. We need all of that.
Come on.
Come on, Doug. But wives are called to submit to their husbands. Not ever to compromise their commitment, their primary commitment to God. Or ever put themselves in a position of physical harm or in a position of emotional destruction. If they are in those kind of situations, the wife should seek help to change or remove herself, at least temporarily, hopefully. But to respect in a genuine way her husband and to submit and follow his leadership, to believe in her husband. I can't tell you how much there were times where I didn't necessarily believe in myself, but because of my wife's belief in me, it lifted me up. It helped me to move forward. And that's what Joanne provides for me. She is my biggest, cheerleader. And so that helps me to be what I need to be for God. To focus on his good qualities.
Come on.
Now, we know they're bad qualities.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two. But to focus on his good qualities, to praise him, to compliment him, to love him, to seek to adapt to his leadership in matters of opinion. Now, not to compromise one's primary commitment to God, but in matters of opinion, to submit and adapt to his leadership. But what happens when things begin to break down?
Come on.
This is God's plan. This is the design. This is the blueprint. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. What happens when things begin to break down? Come on. Things begin to break down when there's a failure to follow God's plan.
Come on.
That is primarily why things break down. Do not be mistaken on this point. The world would want to say it's because of incompatibility. The world would say it's because we have started to fall out of love for one another. There are a lot of lies that Satan would want to convince us of in this area. Things begin to break down when there is a failure to follow God's plan. Amen. You say, I've been married a long time. It should only get better with time.
That's right.
Just like fine wine. It should only get better because you should know one another better.
That's right.
The worst part should be at the beginning when you're fumbling around trying to figure it out.
That's right.
So you've been together a while and it's amazing. Sometimes Joanne says something just as I'm about to say something. I mean, you know one another so bad, so well that you're reading one another and you know one another's thoughts. You can repeat the next one. It just says. When you've been together so long, it should only get better, not worse. Don't let the world fool you on this. Do not accept what the world says. It is a lie. So we can start seeing ourselves falling into bad patterns. We can get unhappy. We can have an unfulfilled marriage. So when there's an unfulfilled marriage, why does that happen? There is sin somewhere. Come on.
Yes.
Trust me, there is sin somewhere. If that happens, and it can happen to any of us, it happened in my marriage, it's time to seek God, get help, and find repentance. Come on. I'll repeat that. When things start to break down, when you're starting to feel unfulfilled, when you start to see that there's unhappiness, do not accept the lies of Satan. Seek help, get help, seek God, get help, and find repentance. In other words, we've got to get humble. Amen? Amen. It's important to remember the ideal, what true health is in marriage. I'm a physician. Every single day of my life as I work, I'm dealing with problems. Related problems. Come on. Why do things begin to break down in the lives of my patients from a health perspective? Poor diet, lack of exercise, obesity, tobacco abuse, alcohol abuse. What is my simple message? Get back to healthy living. Now, oftentimes it's more than there's a lot more I can offer than beside that advice. But I'll tell you, that's the core of oftentimes my message to my patients. Get back to basics. Get up off your fanny and get out there and start moving around. Come on.
Come on, Doug.
Okay?
Right.
Watch what you eat.
Yes.
When you eat. Simple things. Fruits, vegetables, whole I mean, I won't get into all of that.
Come on, Doug. Come on, Doug. That's right.
Hold it out for you.
Reach that. Come on.
Women, get your mammograms, all right? Leave the lies. Right. What are the lies? It can't work. It was great on the wedding day. It was great for 6 months. It was great for a year, but it can't work now. Perhaps it wasn't really meant to be. Perhaps this was the wrong person. Maybe we can just learn to cohabitate. He has her space, she has hers. And we'll share the bills, and we'll just sort of go to church and that kind of thing. There really isn't anything to this whole true happy marriage that does not exist. I've never experienced it. I didn't see it in my home. I don't know anyone who has it. It doesn't exist. Maybe a few elders have it. Maybe Bill Cosby. Well, no.
Mr. Huxtable.
Oh, boy.
Maybe I'm not destined to have a happy marriage. Maybe it exists, but I'm not destined to have it. I believe it would be better. I'd be better off. She'd be better off if we just ended this thing. so that we can really, truly be happy. Well, people in Jesus' times had the same ideas. Let's turn over to Matthew chapter 19.
Come on, Doug.
Because I want to talk about the specialness of God's eternal plan for marriage and His church. So we'll do a little Bible study here in Matthew chapter 19. Jesus came to bring us a righteousness that would exceed that of the Pharisees and scribes of His time. What are you talking about? Well, earlier in the book of Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, earlier he went on to say that if we didn't have this type of righteousness, okay, the righteousness that would exceed that of the Pharisees and scribes, and that's a pretty high standard of righteousness. They were very righteous men, maybe self-righteous, but they were righteous. They lived righteous lives. But he says, as disciples, we are to have a righteousness that even exceeds that. But what are we talking about? You don't even go there. In 5:20, he said that you would certainly not even enter the kingdom of heaven if you don't have that level of righteousness. And so what am I saying to you tonight? If you do not have a level of righteousness that exceeds that of the Pharisees and scribes of Jesus' time, you can't go to heaven. What am I talking about? This type of righteousness is more concerned with whole heart, thank you, whole life discipleship. It's more focused on the internals as opposed to the externals. In verse 21 of Matthew 5, it said, "You've heard that it was said, 'Do not murder.' And anyone who murders is subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment." You see, he brought a higher standard. The law, the 10 Commandments said, "Do not murder." He said, okay, well, do not murder, but the issue is don't even get angry. That's when you're committing murder in your heart. He says, you've heard that it was said, "Do not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Again, he put on a higher standard of righteousness. It's not just the external, but it's the internal. And so we get here to Matthew chapter 19, where we deal with the issue